Have you ever felt like you were showing up fully for someone, being supportive, loyal, available, only to realize they were barely showing up for you? That slow, painful feeling that no matter how much you give, they just don't see you. Here's the truth. Sometimes the only way for someone to truly recognize your worth is for them to feel the loss of it. And that doesn't mean playing games. It means having the self-respect to stop showing up for someone who treats your presence as a guarantee. This isn't about revenge. This is about realignment. It's about stepping away so that he can finally feel the space you once filled and either rise to meet your value or stay lost without it. Let's talk about how to do that without anger, without drama, just clarity, confidence, and grace. Pulling back without lashing out is one of the most powerful moves you can make when someone has taken you for granted. It's tempting in the heat of the moment to react, to send the long message, to call them out, to beg them to understand how much they are hurting you. But in reality, that kind of emotional reaction rarely leads to clarity or change. What it often does is reinforce a dynamic where you're always the one chasing, always the one explaining your worth, and they're the one deciding whether or not to acknowledge it. When you pull back instead of lashing out, you flip that script. You stop feeding the cycle that keeps you stuck in emotional overdrive, while they remain comfortable, complacent, and unbothered. Silence, distance, and non-reaction are not passive moves. They're intentional. They say, I'm no longer available for this dynamic. I'm no longer going to overextend myself to keep someone who doesn't meet me halfway. The real challenge here is that your instinct might scream at you to do something. You might feel panicked at the idea of pulling away, fearing it will make him think you no longer care, or worse, that he'll move on. But the truth is, if someone can walk away easily after you remove your attention and effort, they were already halfway out the door. Your consistent effort was just delaying the inevitable. On the other hand, if someone truly values you, if they've been complacent but not careless, your shift in energy is going to be a wake-up call. This isn't about playing hard to get or manipulating someone into chasing you. It's about reclaiming your dignity and stepping out of a situation where you're constantly undervalued. Pulling back allows you to breathe. It gives you space to reconnect with your own self-worth, your passions, your peace. And from that space, you're able to see things more clearly, like whether this person genuinely adds value to your life or whether you were simply holding on because you were afraid to let go. When you stop lashing out, you stop handing over your power. You no longer give him the chance to label you as emotional or too much. Instead, he's left with silence, and in that silence, he has to confront the absence of your attention, your warmth, your care. And sometimes that absence is what finally forces someone to reflect on how much you actually gave and how little they appreciated it. It's easy to be loud when we're hurt. It's much harder to be quiet. But that kind of quiet is strong. It's the kind of quiet that says, I don't need to convince you. I already know who I am. It communicates boundaries without confrontation. It allows someone to feel the natural consequences of their behavior without you having to punish or explain or fix anything. Pulling back is self-respect in motion. It's you showing up for yourself in the way you wish they had shown up for you, and in many cases it's the only thing that makes a man stop and realize that the version of you he took for granted is no longer available. Not because you want to make him suffer, but because you finally realize that your time, your heart, and your energy are not things you give to someone who treats them like they're disposable. That realization changes everything, and it starts when you stop reacting and start retreating with grace, with strength, and with the quiet knowing that you deserve more. Reclaiming your energy is one of the most life-changing things you can do after being in a situation where you've constantly been the giver. In a relationship where someone takes you for granted, you often find yourself investing emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically in ways that go unnoticed. You pour your love into this person, thinking that one day they'll finally see it and appreciate it. You hold on because you believe that your effort will eventually be enough to change the dynamic. But the hard truth is, giving more doesn't always lead to receiving more. Sometimes it just leads to burnout. There comes a point where you realize you've been spending more energy trying to be loved than actually feeling loved. And when that moment hits, it can feel both heartbreaking and liberating. Heartbreaking because you recognize how much of yourself you've handed over to someone who didn't truly value it. Liberating because now you have the opportunity to take it all back. When you reclaim your energy, you stop measuring your worth by how much someone else is willing to give you. You begin to recognize that your emotional resources are valuable and they're not meant to be wasted on someone who treats them like they're endless. You start to shift your attention from them, what they're thinking, what they're doing, whether they care to you, what makes you feel alive, what fills your cup. What kind of love do you need, and are you giving it to yourself first? It's not always easy to redirect that energy, especially if your identity has been wrapped up in trying to be the perfect partner. When someone consistently fails to show up for you, your mind can go into overdrive trying to fix it. You question if you're doing enough, saying the right things, being too emotional or not emotional enough. You overanalyze texts, their mood shifts, their level of interest. That mental and emotional labor is exhausting, and it takes you further and further away from yourself. But when you reclaim your energy, you break that cycle. You stop over-functioning. You let go of the need to manage the relationship or their perception of you. You stop chasing clarity from someone who thrives in confusion. Instead, you choose to invest that energy where it actually matters: your own growth, your friends, your passions, your peace. You start to build a life that feels fulfilling with or without them. And here's what's powerful. When you begin to do that, you often trigger a shift. Not because you're trying to manipulate the situation, but because you're no longer feeding the dynamic that allowed them to stay comfortable. The person who once overlooked you starts to feel the distance. They feel your absence, not just physically, but energetically. You're no longer orbiting around them. You're no longer checking in, trying harder, fixing things they broke. That quiet shift in energy is deeply felt, even if it's never spoken out loud. The truth is, people often don't change when you beg. They change when your absence forces them to look at what they lost. But even if they don't change, even if they never come back, you've already won. Because you've taken back the parts of yourself that were slowly being drained. You've chosen to honor your worth, not based on how someone else treats you, but based on how you choose to treat yourself. That's where real confidence is born. Not from being wanted by someone else, but from no longer needing that validation to feel whole. When your energy is no longer tied up in proving your value to someone else, you have space to actually feel your value. And that's the beginning of everything. Not begging to be chosen is a mindset shift that changes everything about how you show up in relationships. It's the decision to stop trying to convince someone to see your value and instead only make yourself available to those who already do. When you beg to be chosen, whether directly or subtly through constant effort, over-communicating, over-apologizing, or tolerating inconsistency, you send a message that says, "I'm willing to fight for a place in your life, even if you're not offering me a seat at the table." That message diminishes your self-worth every time it's repeated. Being unavailable to indifference is a declaration of self-respect. It's recognizing that love, interest, and effort should be mutual, not one-sided. If someone is indifferent toward you, if their words don't match their actions, if they're lukewarm or emotionally distant, then your response should not be to try harder. It should be to take a step back and observe. Indifference is not something to work harder to fix. It's something to walk away from. Because when someone cares, you don't have to decode them. You don't have to wonder if you're good enough. You don't have to earn their attention. When you stop begging to be chosen, you create space for someone who will actually choose you without hesitation. You shift from trying to prove yourself to simply being yourself and letting the right person rise to meet you. It's not about withholding love or being emotionally cold. It's about having boundaries. It's about understanding that your role in a relationship is not to convince someone of your worth, but to share your life with someone who already recognizes it. There's power in emotional unavailability, not in a toxic or avoidant way, but in the sense that you are unavailable to behavior that disrespects or diminishes you. You're unavailable to confusion, to hot and cold energy, to empty promises. You're unavailable to love that makes you feel small, anxious, or invisible. That kind of selective unavailability isn't weakness, it's strength. It's clarity. It says, "I don't need you to pick me, I'm already chosen by me." This mindset doesn't come from arrogance, it comes from healing. When you've experienced enough pain, enough one-sided relationships, enough emotional exhaustion, you realize that chasing someone who's indifferent isn't love. It's self-abandonment. And when you stop doing that, you start reclaiming the parts of you that were lost in the pursuit of someone else's approval. You don't have to be louder. You don't have to be prettier. You don't have to bend or twist yourself into someone more lovable. You already are lovable, as you are. And the person who sees that won't need to be convinced. They'll simply show up, fully, clearly, consistently. So the next time you feel the urge to try harder for someone who isn't trying for you, pause. Ask yourself, why am I trying to earn something that should be freely given? You'll find your answer not in their attention, but in your own decision to stop chasing indifference and start demanding alignment. Confidence is often misunderstood. Many people think it's loud, aggressive, or full of attitude. But real confidence, especially in relationships, is often quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to perform. And most importantly, it doesn't chase after validation. In fact, one of the most powerful forms of confidence is choosing not to explain yourself, not to argue, not to demand what should be naturally offered. It's the calm, grounded decision to let your actions and boundaries speak for you louder than any words could. When someone starts pulling away, acting distant, or treating you like an option, the natural response is to want to talk about it, to ask them what's wrong, to express how you feel, to try to get clarity or reassurance. And in some situations, honest communication is absolutely necessary. But when you find yourself constantly having to ask for attention, ask for clarity, ask for the bare minimum, it's no longer a conversation, it's a performance. You're trying to convince someone to care. That's where true confidence shifts the dynamic. Instead of explaining your worth, you embody it. You don't need to prove that you deserve better. You simply stop accepting what's beneath you. You don't retaliate or try to make them jealous. You don't send the dramatic message or beg for their time. You just quietly remove your energy, and that silence is deafening. It's not cold. It's not manipulative. It's strong. It's a message that says, I know who I am, and I refuse to argue for a space in your life. The thing is, words are cheap. People hear apologies, promises, and sweet talk all the time. But when someone feels your shift, when they sense that you're no longer emotionally dependent on their crumbs, that's when they notice. That's when they look up and realize something is different. The attention they used to expect isn't there. The reassurance they were so used to receiving has gone quiet. And in that space, they are forced to reflect. This isn't about playing games. It's not about using silence as a weapon. It's about trusting that if someone truly values you, they won't need a dramatic exit or a breakdown to understand what they're losing. They'll feel it in the absence of your energy. Your lack of reaction is the reaction. Your emotional detachment is the consequence. And unlike a fight, there's no noise to distract them from the truth. You're no longer chasing. That kind of quiet confidence is rare. It doesn't seek revenge. It doesn't need validation. It's rooted in a deep sense of self-worth. It says, I love you, but I won't lose myself trying to keep you. And that balance, caring but not clinging, is what makes you magnetic. Because nothing is more attractive than someone who knows what they bring to the table and won't beg anyone to sit with them. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment they start questioning their actions. Not because you told them what they did wrong, but because they can feel the absence of your effort. It's powerful, and it teaches people more than any argument ever could. Letting him feel the void is one of the hardest but most transformative things you can do after being taken for granted. When someone becomes used to your presence, your texts, your support, your affection, they can start to believe it's guaranteed. They stop noticing the effort you put in because it becomes background noise. It's only when that noise disappears, when the energy shifts, when the messages stop coming and the check-ins fade away, that they begin to feel what they've lost. That's the void. And it speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. You don't create that void by being spiteful or cold. You create it by withdrawing with dignity, by recognizing that your presence is not something to be thrown around casually. It's a gift. And when someone repeatedly fails to treat it as such, the most respectful thing you can do for yourself is step away. Not with drama, not with ultimatums, just with quiet, confident distance. That's where they begin to feel what they took for granted. Because humans often don't appreciate things until they're missing. It's not fair, but it's true. While you were texting first, remembering the small things, trying to hold the emotional weight of the relationship, they may have assumed that's just who you are, that you'll always be there, that your loyalty overrides your self-worth. But when you stop showing up the way you used to, when you stop over-delivering, over-explaining, over-caring, it forces a reckoning. Suddenly, the emotional comfort they relied on is gone. The ego boost they got from your attention has faded, and they're left with silence. Not because you're playing a game, but because you finally decided to stop giving where there is no mutual return. What's powerful about letting someone feel the void is that it holds up a mirror. Without your constant presence to distract them, they have to sit with the reality of how they treated you. They start to reflect not because you told them to, but because the energy you once gave is now gone. That shift creates space for clarity, for accountability, for regret. Sometimes they realize what they've lost. Sometimes they don't. But either way, you've reclaimed your power because your value is no longer up for debate. The void you create is more than just space. It's a statement. It says, I've given enough. If you didn't see my worth when I was present, you'll feel its absence now. That doesn't require harsh words or grand gestures. It just requires you to stop showing up for someone who wouldn't do the same for you. It's not easy. You'll be tempted to fill that space again. You'll miss them, wonder if you were too harsh, consider reaching out. But that discomfort is part of the process. It's proof that you're choosing growth over comfort, self-respect over temporary connection. Eventually, that void teaches both of you something. It teaches them what they lost, and it teaches you what you gained by letting go. Because in the end, the person who truly values you won't need to be reminded of your worth. They'll feel the void long before you ever have to create it. Knowing your worth and refusing to discount it again is the ultimate act of self-respect after someone has taken you for granted. It's not just a concept or a feeling, it's a daily decision to uphold your standards, your value, and your emotional well-being no matter how strong the connection might feel. The truth is, many people know deep down that they're being undervalued, but they stay. They stay because they hope things will change. They stay because they fear being alone. They stay because they think if they're just a little more patient, a little more giving, a little more understanding, then maybe, just maybe, that person will finally treat them the way they deserve. But that mindset is dangerous. Every time you stay in a situation that chips away at your confidence, you teach yourself that your needs are secondary. You start to believe that your standards are too high, that maybe this is the best you can get, or that love always has to come with struggle. And slowly your self-worth erodes, not because of one big moment, but because of the hundreds of small ones where you stayed silent when you should have spoken up, where you accepted less because you were afraid of losing everything. When you finally reach the point of saying enough, you start to take your power back. You realize that love isn't about proving yourself to someone who's half in, half out. It's about being with someone who recognizes your value without needing to be reminded. Knowing your worth means you no longer confuse someone's inconsistency with mystery or potential. You see it for what it is, a lack of clarity, a lack of effort, a lack of readiness, and you remove yourself with grace, not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself more. It's easy to look back and feel ashamed of all the times you tolerated less than you deserved. But those experiences aren't signs of weakness, they're lessons. They taught you what doesn't work. They showed you what you will never accept again. And from that pain, you build a new baseline, a new standard that says, I am not available for love that hurts more than it heals. I'm not available for attention that feels like crumbs. I'm not available for being an option when I know I'm a priority. That kind of strength is magnetic. People feel it. They know when they're dealing with someone who values herself deeply, and it changes the way they treat you. But even more importantly, it changes the way you treat yourself. You no longer engage in relationships that leave you anxious or insecure. You stop fantasizing about someone's potential and start requiring their actual behavior to match your needs. You're no longer afraid to lose someone who doesn't see you, because now you see yourself clearly, completely, and without apology. And once you've tasted that level of self-worth, there's no going back. You don't beg, you don't chase, you don't shrink. You simply raise your standards and watch who rises to meet them. The moment you stop over-giving, over-explaining, and overcompensating for someone else's lack of effort is the moment everything changes. You're no longer fighting for someone to see you. You're standing in the truth of your worth. And in that space where you reclaim your energy, pull back with grace, and stop settling for indifference, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you finally understand that real love doesn't have to be earned through struggle. Let him miss the girl he took for granted. Not out of revenge, but because you've evolved, because the old version of you, the one who tolerated less, gave more than she received, and stayed quiet when she was hurting, deserves rest. She deserves peace. And the new you? She's no longer chasing anything but clarity, alignment, and love that actually shows up. So let your silence speak, let your absence be felt, and let your standards lead, because the right person won't need to be convinced of your value, they'll recognize it the moment they meet it. And this time you won't settle for anything less.